David, welcome back behind the velvet rope. Let's just get right into it today because we are joined by the ones and onlys, Jake Lefferman and Knez Walker.
Thank you
Hi.
for having us.
What is going on, you guys? Producers of Housewife and Hustler Part 2, The Reckoning. Welcome.
Thank you
Thank
so
you.
much.
You guys, we saw the first one, we saw the second one. You've worked, Knez, you've been at Nightline forever. I know you've covered Scandival. Like Jake, I know you covered OnlyFans. So you guys have had experience in a lot of different topics. Like, just overarchingly, what stood out about the whole Girardi case, like from working on both of these two? I know that's a very broad, loaded
The
question to
big
start
loaded
with.
question, right? I
Yeah.
think what started it, I think what people naturally gravitate to, right, is like the glitzy sequins and like the kind of reality TV aspect that Erika brings to the story. But I think what attracted us as journalists is the bigger overarching story that is what happened inside the legal community and how it happened over such a long period of time without anybody knowing. The things that Tom Girardi is accused of doing are incredibly serious. I mean, he's accused of stealing from the very clients he was supposed to be representing. And then the accusation is he took that money and used it to fuel his life, to pay for everything in his life, all the luxurious things he was getting, and then potentially to fund the life that his wife, who would later become a reality star, was also living. But I think deep down, it was the investigation style of figuring out how does this happen at the scale that it's accused of happening over such a long period of time. So it really is beyond like one guy, one firm. It is a much deeper look into a bigger system of failure.
Yeah, it's something Harriet Ryan says in the new doc, which is, you might think this is Sequins and Real Housewives, but ultimately it's about public accountability and government corruption. So I think that
And,
really drives in.
Were
and
you,
the first one was
yeah.
just like a quick look into it, because when the first one came out, it was very, very new. It was just, hey, this thing has happened. These are like the accusations, but there were no criminal charges. The bankruptcies had just started. There was no conservatorship. There were just a lot of accusations, a few lawsuits, and it was kind of just getting people up to speed on what this big implosion was. Now there's so much more to dig into. So I think the new doc really takes a much deeper dive into the big investigations that have happened since then.
Is that how this second one came about? Is it because like so much has happened since this first one, which seems like yesterday, and then when you look, you're like, oh my God, that was actually a long time ago.
Yeah, it was actually years ago. So the new one
Yeah.
really came about almost, I mean, we get the question now about whether there'll be a part three. But when we did the first one, immediately the question was, where's the second one? Immediately. So I think we always knew that there was a potential for a second one, that there would be more. But I think obviously for a viewer and even for us as journalists, you want there to be significant stuff there. And I think Jake, when we sat down to talk about, we have sat down several times over the last, few years to talk about a second one and what it would be and what needs to happen and all of the things to come together. I think we found like this was the right moment.
Yeah, I think like an audience after the first one, we still had a lot of questions because things were still happening in real time. So it was, when is the right time? When is it there enough out there that it merits something like this? And I think with Erika sitting down with the victims, with the former clients, with everything happening with Tom Girardi in court related to the competency hearing, this felt like the perfect time to revisit something, and that there was enough fresh information that it's, worth an audience's time.
Were you guys familiar like with Tom Girardi before this? And like, as journalists, as producers on this, like, where do you start? Like, there's so much, like, obviously the LA Times article was like a big thing that came out that kind of really laid it out for everyone. But like, where do you start? There's so much info out there.
It really does, I think, like for us, like with most people, it starts with the LA Times. The LA Times, this is their community, right? I mean, they report on national and international issues, but this one was a very local kind of story for them in the sense that he is a very famous LA attorney. And while he's done stuff across the country and around the world that is really high profile, um, for them, this is like right in their backyard. So they, I think, were obviously onto it sooner than when they, when their article went out. But I think for the rest of us, it really was that article that got everybody kind of hip to it. Most people, I think, were really only familiar with Tom Girardi in a broad sense in other parts of the country than Los Angeles, because he would make appearances on Real Housewives. You know, he would be there with Erika. I mean, she got on the show in 2016, and you would see glimpses, and you knew he was her very successful legal husband. And they, of course, would bring up RHOBH, the case that he, ultimately won. And I think that's where kind of like the beginning of it goes. But once you have just the beginning, then we start diving in, and then it becomes about getting in contact with the people who are really at the center of this. And for us, it really started with the Ruigomez family. And that was a big jump in. So Kathy and Joe Ruigomez and his sister Jayne and Kimberly, Archie, they were kind of like the very first ones we got in with. And then it really just spread out from there. And I think for us, a victim-centered approach has always kind of been at the heart of this, because you want to see and hear from the people who you read about, and beyond that, the other people who are impacted. So that was a huge part for us, was making sure that it stayed focused on the people that had potentially been very wrong.
Mm-hmm.
What do you think has changed the most from like the first one to this one? And like, do you think like it's the public's perception? Like I think Erika was more a part of this one. Like, do you think the public's perception of Erika has changed? And like, what do you think has changed, I guess, the most from the first one to, other than the obvious, just things which have happened?
I think for us, and what we found really compelling, the first one really was focused on the rise and fall of Tom as a man, and Girardi Keese as a firm. And it was happening as, those allegations were coming out that, maybe he had defrauded the clients that he swore to protect. This one really is focused on, okay, that story is interesting for a few weeks, but what are the larger forces at play that, allowed him to get away with his alleged crimes as long as he did? So for us, it was looking at the State Bar of California, building on the reporting from Matt and Harriet from the LA Times, looking at his relationship with politicians and other people in power in Los Angeles and California and beyond. And really seeing the structures that allowed something like this to go on as long as it did. And if the crimes are true, allowed him to hide in plain sight for as long as he did. So I think for us, that was something that felt different and felt like something really meaty that you could explore.
On the Erika front, I think many things have probably picked up or changed since then. Because in the beginning, again, the first one came out, it was a lot of accusation and a few lawsuits, but a lot hadn't developed. There was a lot of like rumor, and I think like, questions about who knew what, when, where, and how. I think because of the last several years, the investigations that have happened, the bankruptcy, and how open they've been with all of the documents that had to come out of that, and there still remain a lot of questions. But I think what allows us to dive deeper also into Erika in the second round is there has been more paperwork. The bankruptcy is going after her for a certain amount of